See, you have to be careful or Marge is going to start singing, "Fly, Eagles, fly." No, just kidding. It was a fun game. I hope your team won. Mine did. Everybody want to find a chair? So good morning. I want to welcome everyone to the first of many conversations we're going to have about how every teacher, every student support person, and every staff member at Lane is going to play even more of a vital role in helping our students succeed. LCC is the bright light in this community with a whole variety of majors and concentrations for students to pick their career goals. But the numbers of students attending Lane has significantly decreased. It's challenging us to rethink our systems and rethink our past assumptions about who our students are and what they need. Lane has faced and is facing one of the greatest drops of enrollment in our student body in the whole state. It's facing one of the lowest completion rates in the whole state. It has experienced academic warning from an accrediting agency, and we have experienced the largest drop in state funding in the sector. So how does one rebound from that back to greatness? First, we need to admit we have challenges. Then we have to rally everyone around the need for systemic changes that focus on increasing the numbers of students that succeed and achieve their goals. We need to focus and rally around our strengths, and we have many, and most of them are sitting in this room. This is like preaching to the choir. You came today because you want to see us improve and do better. This college proved to me that they can do it by rallying around the warning from the accrediting agency, and I'm happy to announce here today that because you folks all rallied for the past year, that warning has been officially lifted. My letter goes out today. So applaud. So we still have work to do, though, and we need to listen and learn from the research, evidence-based practice. That's the world I come from as a healthcare practitioner. Evidence-based learning. That's the world I live in today. We need to listen to the research on how to create systemic change to improve student success. So here to introduce our keynote speaker today is Jane Harmon, our Interim Vice President for Academic and Student Affairs.
So I'm introducing Rob Johnstone, who is one of my favorite people. When I came to California, there was two websites that really helped me to understand what was going on in California. One was the Academic Senate website, and if you haven't taken a look at the California Academic Senate website, do so. Shared governance is at the heart of what they do, and they've done a phenomenal job with it. The second was the Research and Planning Group, the RP group, and much of that work was led by Rob, looking at what the issues were and the interventions. One of my favorite things that he did was to talk about cost benefit. New things that you do always cost, but if you can look at the benefit and increased FTS, that sets it off, so cost benefit analysis. So Rob comes to us from 22 years, is it Rob? 22 years?
Sure.
Working in California and around the country with these initiatives. He has worked with the Aspen Institute, Achieving the Dream, the Lumina Foundation. He is on the cutting edge of what is happening with 2- and 4-year institutions in improving the success of our students. I also found out when I was talking with him yesterday that he graduated from the University of Oregon Graduate School. He's a social scientist, and he was instrumental in getting a minor league baseball team here while he was studying.
Almost,
so
but that's
important things.
Yeah.
So I give you Rob Johnstone.
Okay. All right, how you guys doing today? Very cool, thank you. Good to see you. All right, it is fun to be here. I was at U of O from 93 to 96 in the good old Straub Hall, which someone told me does not look the same as it did back in 93 to 96, getting my doctorate in social psychology. So I lived here in Eugene for 3 years. I started a semi-professional baseball league that I think is still around. And I played a lot of baseball here at Lane. You had one of our fields, and some of you have been around a long time. What was your old coach's name? Jerry, long time ago, your old baseball coach here that I knew very well. So I spent a lot of time in Oregon, and I've, since 96, been doing a lot. I worked in industry for about 6-7 years as a strategic consultant, and then in 2002, I landed in the community college system in California at Foothill, your league board rep partner, and I remember being in this very room in about whenever you guys hosted the league in maybe 2007 or 2008, because I was the league board rep at the time for Foothill. And so we're going to have some fun today. We're going to explore some really important topics, and we're going to move. But I'm also going to make you guys hopefully laugh a little bit. If I don't make you laugh, I've failed miserably as I go through this. Currently, on maybe? On's good. No, that's off. Hey, there we go. What do you do with every electronic thing that doesn't work? Turn it off and turn it back on. All right. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to, over the next little bit over an hour, I'm going to start with a story of hope, a place that 15 years ago, although it is a 4-year school, and we'll talk about the similarities in a second, had a very similar backdrop to the story that is in the place here and is at many community colleges. And we're going to tell you that story not really almost because of what they did, but because of the fact that they were able to do it. And we're going to talk about that story of hope in Georgia State University. Then we're going to talk about how do you build urgency for this movement that we call guided pathways and the case for change. I'm going to share with you some data from the Equality of Opportunity Project. I come at this work from a social justice mission and a mission of economic mobility. And I know the community here, and I know that there are high levels of poverty. You have a very large number of students living below the poverty line. I grew up in East San Jose in California in the lowest income decile, and I know what it's like to try to move through educational systems when you're coming from the lowest income levels. And we're going to talk a little bit about maybe the urgency that we should be even maybe a little more than we thought, because in the end of the day, it's students' lives that are in the balance. And so we're going to come back to that. And then we're going to kind of explore guided pathways. I'm actually not going to talk about the mechanics of guided pathways much in this session, but I am going to set it up. When I was a kid, I always wanted to be a game show host, so I'm going to get to play it a little bit in a couple minutes here. We're going to do a little game show thing as well. And so let's kind of start here with Georgia State University. So here's a reason we want to think about optimization. So I was taking a look at some of your success data last night online, and was thinking about how similar it is to Georgia State. So if you look at Georgia State University back in the early 2000s, anyone happen to be from Georgia? That doesn't tend to be. Yes, you are. From where in Georgia? Oh, you went to UGA. So you know this school, right? You know Georgia State at all? So where is it? Downtown Atlanta, right? It's in the heart of downtown Atlanta. This is an urban regional 4-year school. It's surrounded by the freeway and downtown. Most notable thing is Martin Luther King's birthplace was like right next to campus. But from a standpoint of like the type of 4-year school it is, like you guys know this a little bit from being in one of the states. Most states have a very similar progression in their 4-year schools, right? You have a flagship university who's the most selective, right? The one next door here, who tends to, in most states, have a graduation rate, 6-year graduation rate that hovers between the low 70s to the low 90s, depending on how selective it is, right? There's this myth in higher education, though, that all 4-year schools have good graduation rates and all 2-year schools struggle, which is completely not the case. Because if you start walking down the line from the selectivity of 4-year schools, so usually you have a second flagship in each state. Now, I know that I often get myself in trouble when I say that the orange school up the road is the second flagship here in Oregon. Try this in Michigan with Michigan and Michigan State. They get really pissed. But you have a second flagship, not quite as selective as the top one, but again, graduation rates maybe drop 10 points below the flagship, right? And again, I would say largely those graduation rates have a lot to do with selectivity and not anything in particular to do with what they actually do at the institution to improve graduation rates. But then you get down to the regional schools, Central Oregon, Southern Oregon, Portland State, right? And the regional 4-year schools, I don't know how many of you know, their graduation rates drop precipitously down into the 50s, the 40s, and the 30s. And if you have a regional urban 4-year school like Georgia State, 31% is a very common graduation rate. California, which has theoretically the top four-year system in the country, the CSU system, so those 23 Cal State University colleges, you want to know what their graduation rate was 7 to 8 years ago? It's about 47%. Under 50% going into theoretically the top regional four-year school in the front. CUNY and SUNY will argue this, of course. But the point is there's a bunch of regional four years. And of course, we also know that community colleges, by the way, nationally, if you add up 150% graduation plus transfer, right, which is when I work on the Aspen Prize, which is one of the things I work on. I do all the site visits on the Aspen Prize. I'm about to do the interviews for the next round. That if you add, when we look at the data on that, the national average for transfer out plus completion hovers between 35 and 40%, right? Now, there are schools that moves well up into the 50s. There are a couple of schools, comprehensive schools, that are in the 60s, and the one who won last time was in the 80s. Now, that is a very unique institution, which we'll talk about later. But there are comprehensive institutions that are doing much higher. So this whole 4 years do fine, 2 year students don't is kind of a myth. There's a lot of variability in both. So when you look at Georgia State, you're also looking, when you go to the regional 4 years, especially the ones that are more urban, you're seeing not that selective. They're actually very similar in student populations to those who start at community colleges. On average, they're slightly higher academically, but it's actually not that much higher when you compare a regional 4 year and the kind of 2 year college student. And so when you look at the Georgia State back in the early 2000s, they said their graduation rate was 31%, which when I add up your transfer out rate plus completion rate, you're about a point or two higher than that, maybe 32, 33%. So this is a college whose outcomes are very close to yours, although they're 4 year outcomes and yours are 2. But so maybe the most important part of this entire story, and this is, I think, something that we tend to overlook, is what happened there at Georgia State. Now, it doesn't have to be the case, although it happens to be the case here too. New president, new provost, right? Come into the institution, ask some questions about data, not out of any sense of negativity, just trying to want to know what the playing field is, right? New president, new provost look at the data, and they get the 31% result back from their IR department. They say, you know what? This is not okay. It's actually not okay that 7 out of 10 students who come to this institution do not reach their goals. Now, every single one of us can go in the back of our heads to the reasons why the 7 out of 10 students don't reach their goals, and many of those reasons, because I'm a social psychologist, by the way, so I think about in-group, out-group. We got a lot of convenient reasons that don't implicate us at all, right? Every system blames the system before them, right? So grad schools blame 4 year universities for not teaching writing and critical thinking. 4 year universities blame us for questionable transfer students, even though our students do the same or better than their native freshmen. We blame high schools, right, for underprepared students. High schools blame middle schools blame elementary schools. The one universal in all of this is everyone blames the student. We have a universal history of saying that the student is the problem, right? Students these days, students aren't what they used to be, which, by the way, I did notice on one of your IR things when I was poking around that phrase, which I like to use, is one that you guys did a report with, right? Students are what they used to be, actually. When you go back and look at the data, maybe not 50 years ago, but in the last 25 years, students look pretty much exactly the same as they always have in terms of preparation. What do we have now? We have better data and people pointing us to look at that data, right? But the preparation's actually relatively similar. So every system's used to blaming the system before, and again, the one thing we often blame the student, we often blame families and their parents for not being focused on education. There's a lot of kind of rhetoric and code in there as well for blaming the students. But a lot of the times we don't look at ourselves. And what they said at Georgia State is, all right, well, let's take a look at some more data, but let's try to understand this problem of a 31% graduation rate by asking better research questions, so asking about data. So they said, all right, so they started looking around. Everyone looks at this metric, because it's, in my opinion, my least favorite metric in higher education, and that is fall-to-fall retention, right? It's a basic, that makes sense from a logic standpoint, right? They got to be here next fall to graduate, so let's look at how many of them are there next fall and keep that as an important metric. Here's 2 reasons I don't love this variable. One is, no matter what your number is over a 10-year period, it really tends to look like this, which is it bumps by about 1 or 2 points. Now, as a small to medium-sized community college, you'll see this number move 4 or 5 points around shifts in the economy, right? So I noticed looking at your data, 2011, 2012, highest retention place, highest enrollment. Economy gets better. You tend to lose 5 to 10% after the economy gets better. Now, I think obviously what the problem here has been is it's continued, right? We're going to talk about that. We think there are ways to kind of move that back forward. And by the way, the answer is not finding more students. The answer is keeping the students you're already getting here longer to reach their goals. I'll put some numbers on this later that hopefully will shock you a little bit into saying, look, this is actually the answer to our problem. Because pretty soon, by the way, this keeps on that trend, this starts being about jobs. And look, we all know Maslow's need hierarchy. Where does it all hit us first? It hits us with our food and our stability. You guys are at a point where you need to move this back in the right direction to keep the institution fiscally stable and have everyone keeping their jobs. You got to be realistic about that because you can't drop 45% and not have there be outcomes, right? It's just the way it is. So we're going to stay positive though. I think there's an opportunity to do this. But we do see some bumps in fall-to-fall retention if we look at the numbers. But this number, the other thing, the problem with this number is, like, this is, by the way, we'll show you what your number would be in a second. This number is, all right, so wait a minute. They got 80, 81, 82% of their people are here the second fall. What was their graduation rate? 31. So there's one myth of higher education we can shut off. The first year is all important. If we just get people through the first year, it's all good. Well, apparently not. They got 8 out of 10 people through the first year, but 5 out of those 8 they got through then disappear without graduating. By the way, it's a regional 4-year school, low-income students, a lot of students of color who are racking up student loan debt and not graduating. I'll give you some numbers on student loan debt in a second, too. So they look, 31% graduation rate. So then they started, they said, by the way, I think the first year is incredibly important. I love first year experience programs. I think we need to put people on the right path, but it's not enough, right? Clearly, it's just the first of a number of steps, or maybe the second of a number of steps to go back into the high schools. But they started asking more. I'm a good research IR guy. I like good research, social science. So they asked more research questions. Any piece of data asks you to ask more questions. And the question they landed on that was their epiphany moment, which is one of my favorites, is the following, which is, I wonder what percentage of our students are not only retained, but have sophomore status. What does that mean? They are 1/4 of the way to a 4-year degree. This is a semester school, but moving it into quarters. They have 45 transferable or college-bearing credits on the way to a 180 credit degree if they were a quarter school. That would make them academically a sophomore. All right. And that number, when they looked at it, was 22%. Now, before you groan too much, because the groan is universal. I've heard the groan before. This is like somewhere around the 400th time I've used this slide, probably literally. Let me ask you this. What do you think it is here at Lane, where after 1 year, what percentage of your students are halfway to either a 2-year degree or to transferring with junior standing in a major? I happen to know the number because I looked it up. It's about 6. So now hold on a sec. Let's talk. All right, let's talk. By the way, that's actually very common nationally. If you look at the average for a community college after 1 year, percentage of students who are perfectly on path, the number hovers between 5 and 12%. Much closer to 5. There's a couple colleges where it's higher. I can tell you why in a minute. Why would that be? Now, for the reasons for Georgia State and the reasons for Lane, that those two numbers are so low, are strikingly similar except for one. There is one that's significantly different. So what are the reasons here at Lane that only 5-6% of students would be on path after 1 year? Yeah?
Let's see, 45 credits here at a quarter school would be the equivalent of a quarter way through a bachelor's degree.
That's right.
So most students, in my experience, are registering based on financial aid.
Yeah.
12 credits.
All right. Absolutely right. So, by the way, I love that the first one, I want to go get a couple more, but I love this one, right? So, I'm no expert, but 3 times 12 is not 45. I've forgotten a lot about math, but 3 times 12 is not 45. And before your head goes to, but our students can't handle 15 units, start checking your assumptions a little bit on what students can and can't handle, right? In many parts of the country, I have to talk about what students we're talking about when you can't say what we can and can't handle. You guys are, like, let's just be honest about like things. You guys are primarily white here, right? This is obviously your students are 80+% white. So you have a very low percentage of minority students. At places where it's probably still an issue, but at places where we have a larger percentage of minority students, we often say, well, those students can't handle full-time loads, which just starts the institutional racism reel running as it keeps going. And we'll talk about this a little bit as we move through the day as well. But even with low-income students and students of color, we make these assumptions of what they can't do, rather than what they can do to keep them on path. So that, by the way, I love that one because that usually comes about 6th on the list. So what else? Yes? Yeah, that's right. So you can't get to 45 quarter units if they're taking 8 units of Dev Ed every semester, right? And so obviously I'm not going to spend that much time on Dev Ed today because I think we spent a lot of time over the last 12 years talking about Dev Ed, math, and English as if that was the only problem we had in community colleges and higher education, which very conveniently, by the way, let the rest of the institution sit back and go, yeah, math and English faculty, you guys fix that. We're good over here. If you just give us more qualified students and get them through there, all the math and English faculty are looking, I can tell you right now because they're looking at me, I'm looking at you, they're like, yeah, that's exactly what's happened. And I think, by the way, reform in math and English, I do think we've learned a lot about this. If we have time in the breakout, you can ask me more about this. But nationally, we've learned a lot about acceleration models. We've learned a lot about co-requisite models. We've learned a lot about multiple measures, all of which are intended to get more students into transfer level courses earlier, and the results are very strong. But that absolutely is one of the reasons. And by the way, it's a reason at a regional 4-year too. The regional 4-years have 50% of their students needing what would be called developmental education courses at most regional 4-years as well. So thank you, that's a really good one. What else? You guys didn't go to the one everyone's gone to first. What is it?
I think we can have more students than a 4-year school that are also juggling
Yeah.
job and family.
Here's number one, which is part-time student status, right? This is the single thing that most community college rooms, and by the way, you're 100% right, that is a huge issue for community college students. That's not there. Now, I would say, I'm not sure I would frame it as they don't have those same issues, but when you go to a 4-year school, you're making a commitment, unless you're in an extension program, that you're going to take a full-time load for the most part. It's very rare to drop, maybe you drop below it by 3 units one semester, but you do make that commitment much more to 4 years, which is interesting, by the way, just from a commitment social psychology standpoint. You're committing to doing something, therefore you do it. But the part-time student status is a big reason. So I'm going to try to do this rant in under 5 minutes, because I have a rant on part-time students. And I have many rants. This is going to be the part-time student one. So, by the way, I am a huge fan of focusing on student financial stability. It's the other pillar of my work besides guided pathways, is how do we truly serve low-income students. Every project I worked on from 2002 to 2012 said, we're doing this project for everyone, but probably also to really focus on the needs of low-income students, and then did nothing differently to explore what the experience of low-income students were, or actually how they're moving through things. So, part-time student status, though, a couple things about it. One, we tend to, you weren't doing this, by the way, let's be really clear. I'm just point of departure from where you went here, which is we tend to assume that that is something that is fixed and outside our control. These students are part-time. We can't do anything about that, which, by the way, going back to our social psychology from earlier, is a very convenient way of our saying, yeah, that's not our problem. They've got complicated lives. They can't come full-time. They're part-time students. That's all we can do. Now, one observation, if you think data is depressing for full-time students, ask yourself what the success rates are at any community college, not Lane. For students who never go full-time, so students who are only part-time, what is their rate of actually completing a community, and give them 10 years, because the common argument here is, that 3-year number doesn't help. Give them 10 years. The completion rate nationally for part-time students who never go full-time in this country hovers around 15%, right? So 1 out of 7. So we have this in the back of our heads hypothesis. It's okay, it just takes them longer. They have complicated lives. Yeah, they have complicated lives that are apparently so complicated with interacting with our complication that they never get through, right? So that's one thing, is we shouldn't be comfortable that many students are part-time. Now, 2 other ways we can help them go more full-time. One, the obvious one, is work on financial stability. Right? Help more students have the resources they need to come to school, working on things like childcare, transportation, nutrition, tying them to public benefits, all of the things that they can do to give themselves the stability to come more. But here's the other side of this story. And I will tell you that I was on the road 200 days last year. I was in 94 cities. And so I'm in the middle of a 10-day, 7 cities tour right now. And I spent a lot of time, as you might be able to tell, in beer bars. See, I've earned this. This is like earned carefully. So I got here last night, and I'm like, yes, I'm back in Eugene. That's right. By the way, I was down at, what's the new, I don't even talk, Cold Fire. I was at Cold Fire last night downtown. So Anyway, but very often, look, I'm not going to stay in a hotel room. I go down, the game's on, I'm a big sports fan, so I'm hanging out with my computer in a sports bar or a brew pub or just something, having dinner, and I'm there for a couple hours because I'm killing time doing email, and so very often the server will ask me what I do. This actually did happen last night. I take it back. And this end of this story didn't happen last night, but the start did. Hey, what do you do? Oh, I actually I run a consulting firm. I travel around the country helping community colleges work on improving conditions and structures so more of their students graduate, complete, and reach their goals. Which, by the way, it took me a long time to get it down to the Cliff Notes version like that. It's a very cool thing to say. Like, that's actually cool. It's also what you do, by the way. We work on this to try to affect student lives in a way, and I think what we're trying to get to is a growing unease with how many of them aren't reaching their goals, but you are someone who works in an institution that can change lives, right? That's what we do. Now, that's cool, but the cooler part of the story is that 3 out of 4 times, where am I? I'm dealing with the service industry, so I get this answer a lot, hey, I go to Lane Community College, or I go to Lane, or my sister, or my daughter, my friend, my brother, you guys know this, you go out in your community, the ties to the local community college are strong. Okay, so here's what I do next. She was closing up last night, so I didn't have time to do this. I say, hey, if they're a current student, what are you doing at Lane? What's your major? Where are you trying to go? What are your goals? So this divides into 3 categories of responses, all right? The first category, which is the rarest, is, yeah, I'm in my 3rd semester, I'm in the Surge Tech program, I know exactly when I'm going to graduate, I know exactly what I'm taking, I already have a job interview lined up. I'm going to be done like then. Like, that's very small. That's like 1 out of 10. Like, or, by the way, I'm in a 2+2 transfer program with Oregon State's Health Sciences Center. I'm in my 3rd semester. I got these courses left. I'm going to go transfer. I'm going to be a junior. I'll be out in 2 years. Same story, by the way. Some students who are in something that's that structured. That's a very small group, okay? The middle group says, yeah, I think I want to transfer. Cool. What do you want to transfer in? Yeah, I don't know. Where do you want to transfer to? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah? This is the non-specific transfer group. Now, this is an interesting group, by the way, because for a long time we were saying in community colleges, you know, not all our students want to transfer and get a bachelor's degree. Yet another kind of self-defense mechanism to say why it's okay that 7 out of 10 students don't complete. We would say, yeah, not everyone wants to transfer. Well, guess what? We have the numbers now. You want the percentage of first-time in college students that want to transfer and get a bachelor's degree, ours? Between 80 and 85% of students want to transfer. Now, they may not know what that means. They may not know what it's in. But they've been told by society, and rightfully so, that a bachelor's degree matters, right? And why does it matter? We're going to talk about the why it matters in a second to them. But they want to transfer, right? But they don't know anything about it. Now, you are in one of 47 states with bad transfer policy. There's only 46 others. You have very little help here. So you know very well that let's even say they want to do it in psychology, right? I pick on my psychology because it's my field, not because there's anything wrong with psychology. It's very emblematic of that classic gen ed pre-transfer student. It's also the 2nd largest major in this country, right? Behind business is psychology. At any time of 14% of American undergrads are psych majors, which does cause us to ask an interesting question, which is what percentage of the work jobs in the field are held by psychologists? About 0.5% is the answer to that, by the way. So a little mismatch there. Yes? We've gone back before that time where they were forced to do that. So it's actually been really consistent. If you go back 10 years and ask it, it was about 80%. You go back 5 years. Now, of course, it's different because IPEDS forces a program on them. They do say that a little bit more now that they want to do that because they kind of have to. But we are going back to before that rule was, it was in place before it was really enforced. Yeah? You want me to repeat the question? It's like not my first rodeo. I should know the answer to that. Thanks, man. Yeah, so I think that's a really important observation is that a lot of times that goal up front is non-specific, right? But I do think it's important that it's aspirational, right? That's the part I'm getting at more than the specificity of it, because it's absolutely uninformed and likely to change when we do it right then with no scaffolding and no help around. We're going to come back and talk about that. So thank you. It's a really good question. All right, but the final group, by the way, transfer policy, sorry. So you know as well as I do that even if someone's in psychology, where they're going matters. If they're going even to OSU and U of O, right? You take that, somewhat upper division 2-year, somewhat lower division 4-year course, social psychology. Maybe it gets accepted for the major, and maybe it doesn't, right? We've been comfortable historically because we always say, well, they just accept it as gen ed credit, right? They accept the course. But our goal, by the way, is not to have students transfer. Our goal is to have students transfer with junior standing in a major, right? If you're already a low-income student, repeating a year after your 4 years here is not going to help for your keeping your financial aid. Right, so the goal is junior standing in a major. So not only does the course have to transfer, which means they randomly accept the credit, it has to count. So that student in group 2 needs help. They need to know what they're doing. They kind of need to know at least their primary school they're working towards. Right, we're going to try to fix transfer policy in Oregon as we are in the 47 other states that are bad. But I mean, you've been around this one before, right? It's an overtime thing. Hopefully we're finally pushing it. So then the third group, which is my favorite, is I'm just taking some classes at Lane. That phrase I hear so much. I'm just taking some classes. Hey, what are you taking classes in? Yeah, I'm just taking some classes, right? You hear this, right? I'm taking some classes. What does this mean? It means you have a student who has absolutely no idea why they're at your institution. There's no value proposition in their head of what they're here for, what they're getting out of it, where they could go. And what does that mean? We know about what happens when people don't have structural bonds with something. It's really easy to leave. It's really easy to break up with someone when you don't have a lot of bonds with them, right? Students break up with us all the time. We get really excited. We're not happy when students break up with us, but we are happy when we do that survey we always do of leavers and say, hey, why'd you leave? And they always find some reason that isn't us, right? Like, work's kind of hard, complicated, I got this. But if you really peel under the surface, if they were deeply committed and they knew what they were getting from you, it'd be much harder to leave. We have a huge value proposition problem. If you don't think we do, stay tuned for 12 to 15 minutes because I'm going to get to a proof point of why we have a bad value proposition problem. But those are all reasons. So you have dev ed, you've got part-time students, which by the way is a very real reason, I'm not to discount it. You've got 12, not 15 units. Any others? What? Say that again.
A focus on the micro, so fixing the immediate problem in front of your face instead of the macro.
So play that in I think I know where you're going with it. Put that into the context here. Why is that a problem?
Because then it causes us to shrink, so our part-time budget goes down. We have to figure out how many writing classes to offer based on that part-time budget. We offer fewer sections.
Okay, I got you. So you're taking the institutional view of the micro versus macro here. Okay, but what it's getting at is another phase of this, which is are students taking the right courses? Do they know what the right courses are? And then are they able to sign up for them, which is the version of your problem, which is, if students are truly on pathways and programs, we got to offer the courses, right? We'll talk about this. You're going to create a contract with these students if you go down this path that says, hey, you take these courses, you will transfer in 2 years, which then puts the onus on us, guess what, to offer those courses, right? Now, there's a win-win in here, because if we do this right, you're going to have more people enrolling in those courses, so you actually can offer them, and you're also going to know how many you're going to enroll when you do pathways, because by the way, no surge tech student has ever wondered what they're taking in the third semester. No auto tech student has ever wondered what they're taking. You already know how to manage the enrollment in those programs because they're cohort-based, right? Really good observation. They don't know what they're taking or we're not scheduling it. Okay, there's some others, but I want to move on here. But the point is, these things matter, right? They are absolutely reasons that at Georgia State it was 22%, and at Lane it's probably more like 6%. So what did they do at Georgia State? What they did is important because it's a lot of the guided pathways underpinnings. You had high degrees of structure. Every program was structured so that a student knew exactly what to take in what order for all 4 of their years. They worked on financial stability. They worked on monitoring progress so that no one fell through the cracks. There are markers for success. This is now 10, 12 years later. In each of their 100 programs, there are 7 different markers for success that happen as the student moves through the program. And anytime a student misses that gate, it trips an automatic response from the college. Nobody falls through the cracks. And I will submit to you that the vast majority of our classic gen ed students fall through the cracks every semester, right, with no safety net. That doesn't happen at Georgia State anymore. They also, by the way, worked on dev ed reform. They added much more accelerated, much more moving people into transfer level more quickly. So what happened at Georgia State over the 10-year period? Now, I used to make up data sets for my Psych 301 students at the University of Oregon, which will come back up later, the fact that I taught that class at U of O, which was statistics for the social sciences, by the way. If you remember, they still do this. But if you were a bachelor's student in the social sciences at U of O, that was your math course at the university. So a lot of this rhetoric about alternate math pathways, by the way, oh, everyone should do algebra, is not a new conversation. I taught at U of O in '93, and that was that class. Psych 301 was your math class at the college if you were in the social sciences, BA side of the social sciences. But what they worked on a lot is I used to give kind of fake data sets to my students. I could never give this one to those students and say, what happened here? This would have to be like a graduate level education course. How is it possible that you're not retaining any more students, yet triple the number are on path after 1 year? And by the way, you can't say lowering quality, because that's not what happened. Yes? Yeah, so I think what they did is it's a combination of what we're going to call the 4 pillars of guided pathways. You got to clarify the paths so students know what they need to take to get to where they want to go. You got to help them get on the path more quickly, which is changing your onboarding, it's acceleration in dev ed, it's bringing career services earlier. You got to keep them on the path. We got to intervene in customized ways.
Part of the issue I've noticed is it's on their own onus to reach out to that, and they don't necessarily know how to do that.
Hold on to that one, because I couldn't agree more. Hold on to that one. If I forget to come back to it, you bring it back to me, because I never do the same thing twice, because A, it's boring to me, and B, I'm just all over the place. So, but that's a big one. All right, so we've tripled the number of students on path. By the way, notice that this did not happen overnight. It got a little bit, everyone wants to know what happened right here. What was the magic secret sauce in Fall 05? I got to do a site visit on these guys, and they said, you know what, it wasn't a magic secret sauce story. It was that everything we started doing in versions 1.0 and 2.0 reached versions 3.0 and 4. We actually got better at the things we did, and, which is something we do not do in higher education easily, we stuck with it over time. Right? Thank you. I mean, we talk about initiative fatigue. Initiative fatigue happens because you change your initiatives every 6 months, right? You're going to hear me say this later. Guided Pathways is not an initiative, it's a movement. It's not one thing you're doing that you can stick in a trailer up against the butte in the back of campus and say, you people take care of that. The rest of us are going to do things the same way. Another thing, this isn't something you're doing, this is something you're becoming. We're on the West Coast, so I can do new AG stuff now. But you know, that's harder in Indiana. What do you mean you're becoming? What is that, you hippie? Like back home in the trees here, I like it. It's all good. No, but this is an important concept. Like they stuck with this over time. It's a lot, right? It takes time to get this stuff together. We're fundamentally trying to move a ship, by the way, that's been going in the same direction for 700 years, right? Track university model back, my historians in the room. It's either the 14th or the 13th century, it's Edinburgh, it's Oxford, it's the monasteries, right? By the way, who went to college then? Who went to university? The rich offspring of the ruling elite, right? Who had unlimited time, unlimited resources, and unlimited social capital to navigate any problems that they have. And by the way, the goal of the system at that time was to produce miniature versions of the professors so that the discipline would continue. It actually wasn't to educate the masses, right? It wasn't economic mobility, of course. They were already rich, right? By the way, the system works really well today, still, if you have unlimited time and unlimited resources. By the way, the data is really clear on this. If you're in the upper income quartile and you have good test scores coming out of high school, you graduate college about 80% of the time. If you're in the lowest income quartile with the same test scores, same solid test scores, the graduation rate is 27%. Pause on that for a second, right? Even if we are stuck in a thought that college is a meritocracy where we should only have the smart and strong succeed, we should weed out the weak and underprepared, which I want to be really clear on camera, I do not agree with, right? I think we can do a lot of things differently so that nearly everyone can get through our institutions. But even if we believe that, we're failing miserably. Because if you're low income in this country and you don't have social capital in your first time in college, our rates are atrocious. Right? But the point is, it's not easy to move something that's been going in the same direction for 700 years. We democratized higher education in this country in the mid-20th century with the GI Bill. And when did Lane start? 64, interesting. About 90% of the community colleges in this country started between 55 and 72. which is because when we opened the GI Bill up to those eventually millions of students, we didn't have room for them. Caused the expansion of community colleges. Model stayed the same as it was in the 14th century, right? Model still works for those students. Great on you if you are one of those students. I'll show you some data in a minute on that. But the model doesn't work that well for the students we open the doors to. And it's not about quality. It's about the way students move through institutions. So, a great story here, right? Hey, they tripled their students on path. That's a cool story. All right, well, what happened to their graduation rate? And this is what happened to their graduation rate. So I want to pause here and take a drink and let you look at this. The red bars are what their graduation looked like in 2003. And their blue bars are what they look like now. So we are very fond historically, by the way, of using a term called the achievement gap, right? We always talk about the achievement gap, which is, our white students are at 32, African American 26, Hispanic 22. That's actually not actually that big of an achievement gap compared to some that we use that term on. So the term achievement gap is really interesting because what does it imply? Who's the problem with? The student. It's about student achievement, and the student is the unit of measure that needs to be fixed, not us, right? Gloria Ladson-Billings, a great equity writer, still great equity writer, but she in about 2007 said, we got to stop calling this the achievement gap and start referring to it as the educational debt that the system has accrued by allowing this to be the case. It's the system, it's not the student. Interesting argument. I hope she's still looking at data because this slide alone validates everything that she said. Here is an institution that made the fundamental assumption that we can change the conditions and structures. Now, I will guarantee you, they did not start out doing this because they wanted to reduce the achievement gap. This is still Atlanta, Georgia, right? They did not start off from some deep sense of equity. This is not like San Diego or Lane where social justice and equity might be at the forefront. Although it's interesting to argue that in a place where equity and social justice are probably not at the forefront, they still did this. Why? Because they changed the conditions and structures and cultures at the institution. So you want to know some background because we all want to discount this. We all want to say, that can't possibly, what's the story? Maybe they got better students. No. Their average SAT score is 10 points lower than it was 13 years ago. Maybe they have fewer of those so-called challenging students. By the way, we use all this code, thinly veiled code. Students are challenging these days, or these millennials. What does that mean? Poorer, blacker, and browner students, right? It's thinly veiled code. Here, less so on the blacker and browner, but it's poorer, right? So what's the story there? Well, they were 30% African American 10 years ago. They are 43% African American now. Latinos stayed constant at 9. So theoretically, they have more challenging students, to use that bad old code, and yet they've gotten these results. And by the way, we talk about equity a lot. We throw that term around like we have a deep understanding of it. Equity is not about diversity. Equity is about outcomes. An outcome can be equitable a number of ways. By the way, you could have achieved equity from the red bars here by lowering whites to 26 and raising Hispanics to 26. That would be equitable outcomes. You could also do it by just raising the African American to 32 and the Hispanic from 22 to 32. Those would then be equitable outcomes. But what we're actually hoping for is what happened here, is that we achieve equity through improvement of all groups. The white students went up 18 percentage points, which is 60% over the same time frame. Now the African American Latino students shot through the roof. I had some theories about that early on, that when you work on systems and structures and helping people navigate them, it's going to help those who historically had the least ability to do that. And I do believe that's at least a half the story. The other interesting kind of institutional racism subtext to this story, which is not a Georgia State thing, which is if you add in the data about graduating from any four-year school, now the data looks like this. Is this kind of reverse quote, by the way, we never call this a reverse achievement gap when this is actually higher. As an observation, there's not programs to fix the white students there. Sorry, I had to let that out. Anyway, so it's okay, all the people of color in the room are laughing right now. So I can see him right here. I'm looking this way, and I can still see him right there. All right, but the point here of this, by the way, this is still pretty good outcome. So why would it be that so many more white students transfer and finish? It's an interesting story. If you're the University of Georgia, where this gentleman went, or Georgia Tech, and you want to keep, and if you actually, let me start again. If you go to the University of Georgia or Georgia Tech have really stringent freshman entrance requirements, but pretty lax transfer requirements. Did you go there first or did you transfer? Grad school, so it's a different story. So if you want to go to UGA or Georgia Tech as a high school senior, it's really hard to get in. But after a year, or even 2 years or a year at Georgia State or community college, you can transfer pretty easily. Why would Georgia Tech or UGA do that? No one's gotten this right yet. I've asked this question a lot. Why? I'd like you to give this woman a hand. Give her a hand. What's your name? Have you heard me do this before? Have you heard me do this before? You are the only person who's ever answered that question correctly. The question was, why are UGA and Georgia Tech so stringent in their entrance requirements for freshmen, but lax in transfer? Her answer is that it is the U.S. News and World Report rankings of institutions. And why is that true, by the way? They only count first-year freshmen in ranking the colleges on graduation rates. So if you want to have a higher U.S. News and World Report ranking, just be really stringent on your freshman entrance requirements. But then because you need to run a college, you open the doors, right? So that could not be more right. Now, I'm sure there are other reasons too. But what happens then is the students who can afford to transfer down to UGA are the white students in the area, so they disproportionately transfer. But let's be clear. Let's even come back to here. This is the most transformational story of improvement in higher education in the last 25 years. This is a college, and I want you to look, everyone wants to look at this slide as that's a cool slide, it's data, it's a chart. But these are human beings' lives, right? What this means is there are 4,000 new students every year at Georgia State. In 2003, about 1,200 of them would have eventually graduated. Now today, it's the only difference is what the college did. The students were not changed. Look, I'm a social psychologist. Student behavior changed when they changed conditions, structures, and cultures, right? That's the whole point of social psychology. But they didn't attempt to change the students. They attempted to change the cultures and structures. And now, 2,300 of those 4,000 students reach their goals every year. That's 1,100 students a year, lives in the balance. Disproportionately, those students are low income and students of color. Over a decade, that is 11,000 student lives. The only difference between the student was when they started at the college before reform and after reform. When this gets hard, when this gets complicated, remind yourself you're not doing this because someone wrote a book or a bozo in a Hawaiian shirt did a cool presentation, or that your administration says we need to do guided pathways. You're doing this because every single one of you is in this system because you have a fundamental ethic of care for the students who are in your classrooms and in your offices. And too many of those students are not reaching their goals. This is a calling that we are on now. We now know better what happens when we do things the old way. What's the definition of insanity? Do things the same way and over and expect a different result. We got great data on what happens if you do things the same way, right? We have wonderful data. We know exactly what will happen to every new group of students who starts here at Lane if you do things the same way. The question is, are you willing to take on the hard work of rethinking some systems and structures so that students will get an experience that leads them to their goals? That's why you do this work. Remember this slide when this gets hard. If it comes down to what's best for students, well, what's best for students is that X number more of them will actually complete if we go down this path and it works, right? So that's the Georgia State story. Now I want to, because I haven't fired you up enough, I want to talk about something even more depressing, which is economic mobility. All right, I want you to all close your eyes for a second, just for 1 second. Okay, for longer than a second. All right, 5 seconds. How many of you, if you were truly honest, got into working at Lane, faculty, staff, or administrator, as the primary reason being, I want to work on economic mobility for citizens in Lane County? Be honest. How many of you? Raise your hands higher. Okay, go ahead and put them down. All right, everyone open your eyes. What do you think that percentage was of the room? So there's some people saying 50. There were 13 hands up in the room. Probably 125 of you? Yeah. It's about 10% of you got into the field for that reason. By the way, I didn't get into the field for that reason. This is not a gotcha, right? This is we didn't get into the field for this reason, but what I'm about to share with you is maybe how important this mission is, maybe even more sharp than we already considered. Now, I'm a social scientist. I love the liberal arts, right? I fundamentally believe that higher education is about more than economic mobility. What else is it about? An educated citizenry, a feeling of lifelong learning, a set of liberal arts outcomes that are going to carry people through careers. All of that is true. But now ask yourself this question, What percentage of your students attend your college solely for the love of learning? Throw out a number. What percentage? 2, 5, 10. We've asked this. The number hovers between 2 and 5% are here solely for the love of learning. Now, of course, why are you here? You love teaching and learning, right? We love learning. We love teaching and learning. So there's actually a mismatch between why we're at the institution and why our students are. Now, yes? Well, no, I didn't say it was. Yeah, exactly.
But maybe when you come here, you don't come here for that reason, but once you're immersed in it, you come to know it as the reason.
Couldn't agree more. What's your name? Christina. Christina is saying, well, you may not come here for that reason, but when you get here, you become immersed in more how important it is, how it becomes more of a part of the reason you're here. I couldn't agree more. I never would have used, I wouldn't have known if I really thought about when I started in 2002 at Foothill, what the phrase economic mobility really meant, right? You have to get, I couldn't agree more. That maybe it's not why you came, maybe it rises up on that list. And what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes, hopefully, is rise it farther up when you really look at who we're serving. Now, I really want to be clear. I fundamentally believe that I think the liberal arts actually is more important in 2017 as a thing that we need to work on than it was in 1967. Why? Because our students are going to change careers 4 to 7 times. And when you change careers, what you learned in that one accounting class is not likely to go with you. What's going to go with you is a set of things we call our liberal arts outcomes: critical thinking, computation, communication, problem solving. By the way, as an observation, those are the 4 things that when you ask employers where graduates of higher education struggle, those are the 4 things they say. Maybe we need to reclaim what a liberal arts education actually means in 2017, it's 2018, even better. We don't want to claim it for last year, we want to claim it for this year. We need to reclaim what it means in the 21st century, because it's more important now. Because in 1967, you're going to probably have 1 career, maybe 2. Now you're going to have 4, 5, 6. You're going to have careers we don't know what they are yet. So you need that solid foundation. So this is in no way discounting the liberal arts education, but ask yourself that question. Your students are here because they see it as a stepping stone to the career. And let's be brutally honest with ourselves. What percentage of them are going to end up in academia, like we did? 1 out of 100. So let's stop acting as if in our entire enterprise is to serve that 1 student who wants to be in academia. Let's work on the other 99. And by the way, this doesn't mean we're not becoming career colleges. We're not going to all do CTE, although I will point out in a minute that's where all of our success rates are. So we'll talk about that. But this is about a balance between kind of the classic gen ed outcome, but your students want a career. Look, I grew up in East San Jose. I told you I was from the poorest income decile. I'll show you where I landed on this chart in a second. I went undergrad to Stanford for 4 years. I went to San Jose State for a master's for 2 years, and I went to the University of Oregon for a doctorate for 3 years. So I went 9 straight years racking up student loans, full Pell, 0% parental contribution. And I wasn't thinking a lot about jobs and career, but I knew one thing: holy snikey, this better pay off at some point, right? I'm 48, I'm still paying the student loans. So it's sort of paying off. But the point is, your students need to have this translate into something eventually. I had someone in Texas when I was doing this presentation, came up to me and said, Rob, I actually have data for you. I've been asking this to my Econ 1 students for 13 years. Every first day of class, I do a little survey, and one of the questions is a multiple choice question of why are you here at the college? What's the primary reason you're here at the college? In the middle of that list is for the love of learning. I said, cool, what percentage of students said that? She said, percentage. Not a single student has chosen it in 13 years. Holy Toledo. I'm like doing the math. I'm like, I think she's had 3,500 students. Not one has picked it as the main reason they're here, right? Now, does that mean we should not try to imbue a love of learning when students are here? We absolutely should try to do that, but they're not here for that reason. And let's be honest, who's economic mobility most important to? Maybe commonsensically the poor, right? So if you are poor, this matters a lot more than if you're in that top 5% who's always been served well by higher education. Great. So, and I will say this, we can't keep talking about race and income as if they're somehow separate. We're all really comfortable talking about working on poor students and low income students because it hides the race variable. But if you don't think we're talking about both when we say income, ask yourself this question. Is there a zip code in this country where on average Hispanic/Latino or African American citizens have a higher median income than white citizens? It doesn't exist. So is there white poverty in America? Of course there's white poverty in America, but disproportionately when you're talking about poverty, you're also talking about students of color. And we, white people in the room, have to get more comfortable being uncomfortable talking about race. Because there is a portion of this is that race. I mean, you don't have a huge percentage of students here who aren't white. And so it doesn't change anything aside from the fact that we need to have real conversations, because apparently it's not just about income. Our sociologists could tell us about why this income disparity happens, but I'm actually more interested in the fact that it does, and that we tend to kind of shove the race thing under the table because it's easier not to talk about it. It's really both, right? Even in places that you don't have a large percentage of minority students. All right, so let's look at, all right, so fine. Let's look at some of this data, right? Let's look at the data. Let's say, all right, if the American dream were valid, one aspect of it would be access to elite higher education, right? It doesn't matter where you grew up, the American dream would say you have an equal chance of accessing elite higher education in this country. So if you want to go to a Harvard, and you're going to break it up by income quintiles of the parents of the students who went to Harvard, if the American dream were valid, you'd see 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20% from each of the 5 income quintiles, right? Well, let's take a look. You know it probably isn't going to be that, but let's just take a look at it. And I also love, by the way, that the researchers on this project, these guys are data dorks like me. These are clearly the institutions we look to first for working toward the goals of the poor in this country. Places like Stanford, Brown, Harvard, MIT, Cambridge. Now what's interesting is these are economists from these universities who are making this very point, that they aren't serving the poor. So let's take a look at Harvard. So if you go to Harvard, what are your chances of where your parents' income lies? So 70% of Harvard incoming freshmen, this is around 2001-2. You got to let the data come because they're also studying post-graduation success. 7 out of 10 students are from the top income quintile. 15% are from the top 1%, which is almost greater than the entire bottom 3 income quintiles. 5 out of 6 students at Harvard come from the top 2 income quintiles. Now look, it's not in the mission of Harvard to serve students equitably throughout income distributions, although they occasionally pay lip service to it. It's not just Harvard. Let's look at other institutions. Let's add in all the Ivy League, plus these other 4, to create this new category, which I love, the Ivy Plus. Why do we have a new category? Because Stanford, MIT, and Chicago were researchers on the project. So clearly, I will say this though, when I was an undergrad at Stanford, you know that Harvard always had, what's their mottos, Veritas? Is that truth maybe? Something, I didn't take Latin. They have the Veritas logo. And Stanford, we had a shirt on the front that said Harvard Veritas, and the back it said Stanford Very Tan, which I thought was a good, that's why I ended up wearing Hawaiian shirts. No. So what is it at these 12, now these may not be the only 12 elite institutions in the country, but almost 15% of the students at these institutions come from the top 1% of parent income, which is greater than the entire bottom half of the income distribution. So this is not where you're looking for economic mobility in this country. It's not going to happen at the top. By the way, graduates of these institutions do great in the marketplace, but there are so few students from the bottom. They're not an engine of economic mobility. Right? And by the way, in addition to this more being from the top 1 and the bottom 50, you are 77 times more likely to get into an elite private school if you're in the top 1% versus the bottom 20. So this is not where it's happening. So where is it happening? Well, let's take a look. There's Harvard again. Let's look at those public flagships, right? Let's look at Berkeley. By the way, I didn't pick Berkeley because they're Stanford's rival. You guys know West Coast rivalries. We're like, we don't really actually care. Like, you guys care a little bit about Civil War, but a day later, the team that lost, like, I could hear it. It's the West Coast. We're a little relaxed. It's not Michigan, Ohio State, or Oklahoma, Texas, where people go into depressions for 4 months. We just don't care that much. So I didn't pick Berkeley. The researchers did. So here's Berkeley, though. We all know, bastion of the left, wherever you are politically, all good, right? But this is seemingly a very liberal institution, except as much as it is access to those with lower economic status. Because I grew up in the Bay Area. This surprised me, that it was this much of a distinction where they're nowhere near egalitarian. Although it's not Harvard, you're still seeing relatively few students from lower income quintiles at Berkeley. So it's not the public flagships. Who is it? Maybe it's the regional 4 years. And yes, when you go to the regional 4-year schools, the Georgia States, you start seeing like SUNY Stony Brook, which I think is interesting, because I'm not a Long Island expert, but this is like 2/3 of the way out Long Island, right? And there's not a lot of poor students in that community. So they're actually drawing poor students out there from the city and from whatever parts haven't been gentrified still, where poor people actually live in New York. But they're doing a pretty good job. So the regional 4 years where you start seeing balance in terms of who comes. Where are the community colleges? And this is Glendale Community College, by the way, in California, which, as many of you know, is not exactly in the poorest part of LA, right? This is not Watts, this is not East LA, this is not Richmond, this is a relatively upscale part of LA. If you're poor in that area, though, you're much more likely to start at a community college. Why does this matter so much? Because if you rank the outcomes by those four kind of pieces of higher education, privates, elite privates, 95% graduation rate. Public flagships, 75 to 90. Regional 4 years, 30 to 70. Community colleges, 30 to 50. So the system that has the most low-income students has the lowest outcomes, right? And so therefore, although we are better at economic mobility, by the way, than the privates, because even though we have, outcomes aren't as strong, there's more people starting, we actually get more people through. So why does this matter so much? And to me, it just sharpens our mission of economic mobility. And I actually there's a slide missing here, which is if you look at the loan default rates in this country, article just came out from Judith Scott Clayton in the Brookings report. It's just shocking that if you start at a for-profit institution, you have something around I think it's 50, if you take a loan from a for-profit institution, student loan, there is a 52% chance you're going to default in the first 12 years. It's 26% at community colleges if you take loans, right? So there's one problem. Second problem is that you need to take loans more at for-profit institutions. So if you look at any student entering a for-profit versus entering a community college, it's like a 4-to-1 ratio. 45% of for-profit students versus 12% of community college students default on their student loans. Throw in race, by the way, it gets really interesting. If you are a white student in this country and you start at a 2 or 4 year college, your loan default rate is 4% in the first 12 years. If you are an African American student who attends a for-profit university and takes a loan there, and you do not complete, it is 67%. So what this means, by the way, is that those in this country who need the system to be an engine of economic mobility are most the ones who the system treads over and makes the problem worse. So to me, we've got two missions here. We've got the missions of an ethic of care about our student, and we have a strong mission of economic mobility, right? So what do we do about it? Well, what we do, and I got to move up here for a second because I got to play the game show host, is when students come to us. So what are the first thing we do when a student comes to us? Where are my advisors? In the room, back over there. How long do you guys get to talk to a new student when they get here? If you're lucky. 30 minutes if you're lucky, right? Now in those 30 minutes, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to talk to them about their hopes and dreams, their educational history, how they did on the assessment test, what do they want to do, when they can, so it's impossible, right? So what we've tended to do historically, and by the way, the other thing we did is we first tested the students in the two subjects they were most likely to hate in high school, math and English, with students who already were worried if they were college material, and then we say to most of them, guess what? You were right to be worried. We don't think you're college material either, right? Which is pretty much, we don't say it exactly that way. It's kind of what we say. And this is not to say that math and English aren't important, by the way. Math and English are incredibly important. But they're important in the service of something else the student wants to do. 5% of them are going to end up in math or English. 95% are going to end up in something else. We've acted for a very long time as if they get to math and English, that's the story. Then the other thing we do is say, don't worry about it, just take some gen eds. And we show them something that looks like this. So we have our students who are worried that this isn't, I don't think this is yours. Or maybe it is. You're like, yeah, it could be. I love that response. Like, I know this is from Texas, actually. No human being looks at this and goes, I see what to do. Right? We keep acting as if our students are some other species. Like if students were just rational decision makers, everything would be fine. If they just used the opportunities and information we gave them. I'm a social psychologist. You want a list of 100 studies of humans being irrational? We'll show it to you, right? We're not rational decision makers. By the way, we also get paralyzed when we have too much choice. What's the number of things we can rationally decide between without getting paralyzed? It's between 3 and 7. Depending on which study. By the way, phone numbers are 7 digits. Interesting. Between 3 and 7. Like there are billions of combinations of gen ed courses on this list if you could even read. Luckily, a lot of our students are young because I can't read that. I mean, somewhere in my 40s, like, and if it was a low light of a restaurant, I would be in really bad shape. But the point is, no one looks at this and goes, I see what to do, right? And so our students are lost. They're confused. They don't know what they're supposed to do. An advisor can help them if they get up back in their office, right? Someone over here, your point about who uses advising. When I was at Foothill, we had a swipe card for we used anywhere in student services, right? Anywhere in student services, whether it was tutoring, advising, counseling, anywhere. And I asked my researcher, hey, what's the average GPA of students who use it more than twice in a quarter? Use that card somewhere in student services more than twice in a quarter. What do you think that GPA was? 371. So we are brilliant at helping B+ students become A- students, right? Now, it was actually bimodal. I had a bunch of students at the bottom, because who are the two groups of students we tend to serve? Either the ones who are doing fine or the ones who are on like academic probation and have no chance. Right? And I'm not trying to be dismissive, but when you go see the people who get on academic probation, by the time they're there, you only get about 5 or 6% of them back to getting a certificate or degree. So the problem here is with drop-in models, who do we see? Those who don't need it as much. By the way, there's nothing wrong with helping B+ students become A- students, or students at the bottom. So this to me strikes me because when I think about students entering a community college, let's rank them from 100 to 0 on some mythical scale of preparedness. The top 20, I call them the unicorns, you're going to get 19 of those 20 to complete no matter what you do. You could like randomly close campus one day a week. You could take away certain chapters in the book. You could put a moat around the campus, put a dragon in it. It would all, these 20 students would navigate you. They'd figure you out. 19 of those 20 would graduate. They're the ones asking for help, by the way, which is ironic, right? And then at the bottom, there's 10, 12, maybe 15. I don't think this number is bigger than 15. I've always argued it's between 10 and 12. Not a big point. Who are not going to, maybe one of them is going to graduate or get what we classically can consider a completion from Lane, no matter how heroic your efforts are, right? What do you have down here? You have learning disabilities, you have psychological issues, you have mental health issues, you have extreme family situation, you have trauma. You have a certain percentage of your students, you're probably not going to get most of them through. Now, I don't want to give up on those students. We need to figure out a different option. But the problem is too many of our solutions are designed for the top 20 or the bottom 10. So what did I say your completion rate was? Around 33%, if you add it all up. So let's see, you get 19 out of 20 at the top, you get 1 out of 15 at the bottom. That's 20 out of 35. So that means that only 13 of the 65 students who are in the middle of their preparedness get through this college to their goals. That's where your leverage is. Your leverage is not by finding more unicorns. You're not finding more unicorns, they don't exist. Right? You get the same percentage of them you always have. And you're not going to solve the problem first by working on the bottom 12 or 15. You've got so much leverage in the middle. It also, by the way, defines culture within an institution. You've got green light people who will do anything you ask before you ask them to do it. You've got red light people who, with data suggesting that the way they do it works 10% of that time, and this other new way works 90% of the time and is not more work. They're still not doing it without a court order. That's the red light group, right? And the problem with org change efforts is the same as it is with students. What do we try to do? We try to create more green lighters, or we try to convince the red lighters. As with students, org change happens in the middle. It happens with the middle 2/3 of the bell curve, and both org change and with students, that is where your leverage is. Your leverage is at neither the top or the bottom. This is why Guided Pathways is so important, is it's designed to leverage the students in the middle, okay? And so let's, I said I wanted to do this. Anyone name the tune? We're gonna have some fun here. Now I'm gonna wrap it up because, you know, as usual, I'm late. I'm pulling up the answers to these questions. So we're gonna play 2 rounds of the feud to set the table for Guided Pathways. All right, here's the first round. So we're gonna ask the question, what do new students ask advisors? Hold on. I've got it here, you think I was kidding. Top 6 answers are on the board. What do new community college students ask advisors? Go. What classes should I take? There we go. Thank you very much. What else? When do I get my financial aid? We're going to go with how much financial aid can I get, but we're giving that to you. It's early. The judges are easy. It gets harder later. What else? What should I take first? What should I take first? I like that, but no. I like that noise a lot. All right, what else? I like that one, though. Do I have to take English and math? Important, but I like that one either. I like that too. What else? Yes? When can I register? Uh-oh. I think we're going to... What else? How long will it take? Yes, absolutely. What else? How much will it cost? We're on a roll. What's number one? What job can I get when I'm done with this? What are my career options? I can include major in here, but what should I major in? Because I think too often we dissociate those things. Like major and career are versions of the same story. We need to understand careers to pick a major. And by the way, a major is designed to help someone get a career, right? So we need to stop talking about these two things as if they're different. There may be connections, by the way, I will say, and I won't have time to do it in here, but I strongly believe that we need to reclaim the value of humanities and social science degrees that will qualify people for a wide range of jobs. But we actually have to do something to make that connection, because industry has already decided that connection does not exist unless you went to Harvard. So it's up to us to reclaim it, and I think there's some ways we can do that with guided pathways too. So I want to be clear that that's not what I'm saying. And the last one, by the way, will my credits transfer? All right. Anyone look at this list and go, well, that's a really unreasonable list for students to care about? It's pretty reasonable, right? We think our students should have good answers to these questions. Let me ask you this now. If I was to go grab 10 students, let's say I did it last fall. They started in fall 16. They're in their 8th week of their 3rd semester in fall 17. They're in one of my Psych 301 class, right? And I buy them lunch. I take 10 students who've been here 2.5 semesters. I buy them lunch. I ask them a bunch of questions, and I show them this list. I say, how many of you at Lane feel like you have really good answers to these questions right now? How many of those 10? They're not in surge tech, they're not in welding, they're in psych. They don't necessarily mean they're psych majors, they're just taking Psych 1. How many of them do you think have good answers to these questions? 1, the unicorn. Okay, that's maybe slightly pessimistic, but I like it. I'm with you. The actual number's right around 2 out of 10. If you're at a classic cafeteria model school that hasn't done any guided pathways reform, somewhere around 2 of 10 students have a good idea of what the answer to these questions are that you just said were really important, and I couldn't agree more. Yes, sir?
I'm wondering, where did they get their answers?
Where did they get their answers? Where do you think they get their answers?
I'm a faculty member here, and I talk to students about many of these things.
Right, and so,
They ask me,
and by the way, we need to elevate that and provide professional development to faculty on how to give the right answers to these questions and move students in the right direction, because faculty are absolutely part of the answer. But not everyone does that. Not everyone does it the way that you're doing it. I don't know what way that is. We have to elevate the role. I'm a big fan of faculty in the classrooms being a key catalyst to not only course level outcomes, but the overall place of a course in a program of study. Because at the end of the day, you're going to see faculty are going to see a full-time student 200 hours a quarter. And student services are going to see them 3 hours a quarter if we're lucky. So faculty have to be activated in the way you talked about. I had a colleague, I was at a visit 2 weeks ago. He came up to me, he said, 2 things. He said, A, I majored in philosophy. And I wandered for 4 years before I found philosophy. And I wanted to come into this session saying, God, I'm going to hate this guided pathways and this guy. Because wandering was what led me to where I am. I'm very protective of it. And after he sat there for the hour and a half, he said, you know what I was missing is that I would have found philosophy if someone had structured my path to it more quickly, and it wouldn't have taken me 4 years to find philosophy. I would have found it in 1 or 2 semesters. So that was an interesting point. But the other thing he said was that he now spends up to 25% of his classroom time focused on where that class is and what it means in the overall pathway for a student. Career counseling, transfer counseling, all of those other things, making sure the student understands why they're taking psychology, how it fits into their lives, all of those things. So I do think this is a very big deal. The point is most students don't know the answers to these questions. And really quickly, can you think of an educational institution who provides really good answers to these questions? For-profits, right? Phoenix, National. So let's pause for a second. Now, some of you have taught for or worked for at those institutions. I think good people can go work at these institutions and teach. However, anyone know what the graduation rate is at the University of Phoenix, the lauded top for-profit in the country? It's about 20%, 18, 20%. So this is a system that costs 10 times as much as ours does. And who's flocking to it, by the way, from our populations? Low-income students and students of color are disproportionately flocking to places that are 10 times as expensive, even when they say we'll get you financial aid. With loans, they'll get you financial aid, right? Pell and loans don't go as far if you're at a for-profit. So they're taking our students left and right. Why they're taking them, though, is important because they're giving them the answers to these questions in their marketing. It may be a false promise because you know as well as I do that online education is not easier, right? And every ad, by the way, has the woman in her pajamas at 11:30 now starting where they've left out the first 16 hours of her day. Yeah, now is the time to start your online education. That's going to work. But the point is they're flocking there disproportionately. And I have a new slogan. I know you guys are relatively new here. Try this marketing slogan in the community, see how it goes. To combat the for-profits, it's fail with us, it's cheaper. Okay, maybe not. By the way, she laughed. Very often I'll get presidents who do this, like, or they put their heads down. She was laughing. I like that, Dr. Hamilton. All right. So we all agree these are important. We agree that our students don't have good answers to them. We agree that clearly the value proposition of our institution matters because our students are flocking to another institution to get it. So this stuff matters, and we can deliver on this more cost efficiently and with higher completion rates. So let's look where we have higher completion rates. This is the second round of the prize, and I'll finish. And then I will just show you the slide about what the Guided Pathways movement is about. I've talked about it a little, but I think this stuff's a lot more important. So second round of the prize. We'll do it quickly. There are two groups of students who are highly successful on community college campuses. And I usually build this up more, but I don't have time. Cohort-based CT students. Any program chairs in the room of a cohort-based CT student? What program? Physical therapist. So of the students who start, what's that?
Physical therapy assistant.
Physical therapy assistant. How many students start your program in the cohort? How many graduated last year? Well, you got 15 still to work on, so you work on those. While the rest of us are working on the 70, we're not graduating. You work on your 15. 85%. By the way, I'm so glad the first answer wasn't nursing. I love nursing. I love you people. But nursing, of course, is selective, right? So we always discount what nursing does because of the selectivity. There's lots of really good things nursing does, but physical therapy assistant, welding, auto tech, surge tech. When you have a cohort-based CTE program, we tend to see 70, 80% completion rates. And by the way, if we come over to a completely different group, community college athletes, any coaches in the room? Coaches are not here today. If I was asked a baseball coach, what was the transfer or completion rate of the baseball team last year, very often you're going to get an answer in the 60s and 70s, sometimes the 80s. These are two completely different groups of students, right? Cohort-based CTE students and athletes. But I think the reason that they are successful may actually be more similar than you think. So let's really quickly take a look at those reasons. Hold on. I have to look at this. What are those reasons, in fact? What are some of the reasons? They have a peer, okay, we're going to go, they have peer support, right? They have a cohort of their peers. You're the starting cohort on the football team. 98 of the other 99 guys want you to succeed. The other guy's the backup quarterback. He's totally happy if you fail. So they have a cohort of their peers, right here. Clearly defined goals. This is an interesting one, and I will give you the cheer on this because it's number one. They are motivated. They have a clearly defined end game. And by the way, the goal couldn't be more different. Never has someone on the women's volleyball team also been in the physical therapy assistant program. There's no overlap. Completely different goals. Transfer and play at the 4-year or get into that marketplace with my degree and be able to earn a living. Both of those are motivation. We know a lot of research on motivation. It matters for both of these students. Hand in the back over here. Yes? Sense of belonging. I put that with peer support, but it's also, I have a joke in the end here. But it's not really a joke. It actually is not a joke. Why? Because they have a sense of identity at the campus. They have the same outfit, like the outfit, the lab outfit that they're wearing in one, or the auto tech area, or the uniforms on the team. They have a sense of belonging. Combine that with the peers. You got a sense of engagement at the college, which we know from CESI and other research is really important. What else in the way back? You get 2 for that one. That's not just because I'm running late as usual. You get 2. They have clear course plans, right? They know exactly what, her students know exactly what to take in what order. It's different for athletes. For athletes, the athletic counselor sits them down every quarter and says, here's what you take the next semester. One interesting thing about athletes, by the way, what's the overall time to degree at Lane? 4.5 years, right? What's the time to degree for athletes and cohort-based CTE students? It's very close to 2, right? So interestingly, that motivation and structure, you have a ticking time clock on the athlete side. You got 5 years to play 4. You kind of have a ticking time clock on the cohort-based CTE side because you need that job that you're going to enter in, right? You also have discipline and accountability. A lot of these things are similar between the two. All right, 3 more really quickly. Yes, in the back. Two of you guys, rapid fire.
I would say more personal relationship with their coach or instructor.
Boom. What was yours? You guys get them both. See, I knew if I went to you two. There's right there. I could look the same direction. From far away, you got glasses. I got the whole thing. I can't see that far. Same thing. All right. You have a chair or a coach. I love the chair or the coach, right, as a person. That is an institutional agent whose job it is to make sure we have high standards and that students achieve them. No one's ever fallen through the cracks of her program without her knowing they were in trouble first, and the same is true of the basketball team. You have people monitoring their progress, and you have mandatory support. Study hall for athletes, tutoring. If your student in her program has writing trouble, she knows how to navigate the institution to get the student the writing support. The student has an advocate in their chair or coach, and they've got structural bonds to mandatory support. The final one, by the way, because we got to wrap up here, is a ticking time clock. I mentioned this. You got 5 years to play for. So this is fascinating here, right? These are actually factors that take two groups of students who are wildly different and put them on paths to success. You want to scare yourself sometime. Run your completion rate numbers without your athletes or your cohort-based CTE students in it and rerun it. So this clearly works for these two groups of students. Yes, question here.
Both of those groups are wildly diverse, but they're both selective.
How? Tell me how they're selective.
The requirements to get into the PTA program are different. They've done a lot of prerequisites. They've done a lot of planning.
Okay.
To get into the program, and the athletes have to have skill in some way if they're going to get any aid or scholarship.
Is that academic skill, though? So on average, are athletes more or less academically prepared than other entry students? It's slightly less. The research tells us they're slightly less prepared. Now, you got to be careful what it means, right? Because there are certainly some athletes who are really prepared and some but these means are about here and here.
What I mean by prepared is that they've had this sort of preparation in high school a lot of them.
I agree with you. No, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I think the point is these things clearly matter, right? Getting an early start on them matters more, right? I have a dual enrollment rant that I can't go on right now. That dual enrollment also has to be program-based, or you're just taking the chaos that exists in our normal structure and pushing it earlier, right? So, by the way, when you look at dual enrollment outcomes, if you're not doing programs, they're not much better, because you're just taking the same problem and pushing it earlier. And we all know dual enrollment's a convenient enrollment gain to do in the short term, but what is it eventually doing for students we have to take ownership over? So I don't have a lot of time to go into it now, but I've got breakout sessions that are available to all of you. But I will show you this. This is like the graphic that we use to say what is the guided pathways movement. The upper right, the green, is what I said earlier. Clarify the paths, get students help to get on a path, keep them on the path, and ensure that they're learning what we say they're learning. And there's a lot under this. There's a lot of research under this. There's a lot of I've written a couple of papers called Guided Pathways Demystified that walk through the biggest questions people ask about this. But I will finish with this. This is a story about social justice and equity, right? Whether you got into this institution for economic mobility or not, it is, as you said, maybe an evolving part of our goal here to be here. And this is not a rich community, right? There are most communities in this country that have a community college based in it are not that well off. There's a small handful of 100 community colleges who have the benefit of a really high median income in the area. And by the way, if you look to those places, like for example, Santa Barbara in California, and then you look at the community college student population, you find they're not coming from the high income parts of the community. They're coming from the low income parts of the community. I think this mission of social justice and equity should strike to our core. We know what happens if we do things the same way. We've learned from the early adopter colleges and guided pathways that if you change the conditions and structures over time, we can get significantly more of our students to complete. I know I'm a couple minutes over. I don't want to take any more time into the break. There's a lot behind this. Come to the breakout sessions. Ask every possible question you could ever imagine, because it's important to get all those questions on the table so that you can have a discussion about how to move forward on this here at Lane. So thank you guys so much for your time.